Welcome everyone to our State of Public Affairs and Dual Pandemic panel. I am Associate Dean Catherine Squires with the Humphrey School of Public Affairs, and I am here to say hello from Dean Bochwe. As some of you may have expected that she would be here to moderate the panel today. Unfortunately, she was pulled away to another meeting, but she is really glad that we are ending Black History Month with this panel, and all of our panelists are here and I will be introducing them. So our discussion today will put a spotlight on some of the policies that have racially disparate effects on African-American individuals and communities. So on this last day of Black History Month, we have gathered these experts here to share their work and perspectives with our Humphrey community. We're so glad that you can make it with us today. So our panel today features Humphrey School doctoral candidate, Rashad Williams, alumnus Denetrick Powers, who earned his degree in urban and regional planning, and Shawntera Hardy from Civic Eagle. So first I'll ask each of our panelists to give us an overview of their current work, and then I'll ask each of them a few questions, and then we'll have time for audience questions at the end. So if you do have a question, please use the Q&A function, which is towards the right-hand side of the bottom margin of your Zoom window. We do have the chat function enabled for comments, but consider this an invitation to spend your time listening to our panelists and consider using the chat to share resources that are related to our conversation. As always, please keep your comments civil and to the point. As one of my teachers likes to say, bring light, not heat. So now I'm going to introduce our panelists. And first, let's hear from Rashad Williams, who is a PhD candidate here studying Black political thought and urban planning. His research and teaching explore housing policy, community and economic development, the moral bases for corrective racial justice at the municipal scale, and the range of policies that might constitute reparation in the planning context. Welcome, Rashad.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. As you know, I'm Rashad Williams. And so I'm interested in why racial inequality persists. That's one way of distilling, that description of what I do. And so I usually start this conversation when I teach with an anecdote. I was listening to, for example, a podcast once with Marianne Williamson, who recently, as you all know, supported reparations in her presidential bid. And also Anand Girahardis. And Anand was speaking about the show Downton Abbey. And he said that, every regime throughout history has created its own kind of spirituality to justify itself, its power and its control, even as it defies reason. And so he talks about the show Downton Abbey and the subservience of the house staff working for a wealthy family, and how the servants see themselves as indebted to essentially feudal overlords, when in reality, they're living under exploitative conditions. And so they say things like, I would give my life for this family, and it's an honor to serve this family. So I have to admit, I haven't seen the show myself, but the point is this, the social formation, as I take it, right, the point is this, the social formation, similar to our racial formation, within which the servants lived was seen as natural for many and was taken for granted. It was common sense. And so the political and economic inequality was rationalized as biological inequality. Perhaps it was divine right, or perhaps it was a precursor to eugenics, but the inequality was extra economic, imposed not by the laws of man, but by the laws of nature. And so when we watch shows like this, we think about them, how could anyone have believed that nonsense, right? How could anyone have not seen through the rouge, or how could anyone have accepted the terms of a patently unjust social arrangement? But as social theorists like Marx, Du Bois, Angela Davis, Cedric Robinson, and so many others point out, we need to ask ourselves that very question today. Why are we accepting the terms of an unjust arrangement today, with regard to class and also with regard to race? And so what I want to do is pull up just very briefly, if I can have host or sharing privileges, schools of thought on why racial inequality exists and persists. 1 second. Okay, well, instead of sharing, I can tell you that in the main, there are two schools of thought. Okay, there's a group disability school And then there's a racism school. In the group disability school, you'll find the familiar characters. You'll find the biological determinist perspective, which is no longer, thankfully, considered within the orbit of reasonable political discourse. But suffice to say that these folks make nature herself an accomplice in the crime of political inequality. And I'm quoting Gold with that. There's also a culturalist behaviorist perspective. And you'll find the culture of poverty perspective. You'll find other perspectives touting the superiority of European culture, the maladjustment of Blacks to freedom, and so forth. Also not really within the realm of reasonable political discourse, but it is a liberal kind of racism. And the racism school, on the other hand, you have another culturalist perspective, perhaps we'll call it the liberal culturalist perspective, which understands that racism in an attitudinal sense is a problem, but it misunderstands the source of racial inequality, right? And so it's a way in which we think about the perception, to kind of paraphrase Gunnar Myrdal, giving rise to the condition of Black inferiority, right? So he said the perception of Black inferiority gives rise to the condition, and the condition gives rise to the perception. Too often it's the case that we think that we can just undo racial inequality by attacking those very perceptions and not actually dealing with the structure. And so there's another perspective within the racism school that acknowledges that racial inequality is very likely to reproduce even in the absence of ill will or racist attitudes toward Black people. And so that's where most of my work lies, in the structuralist perspective within this kind of larger school of thought. And that's where I think reparations actually lies as a topic. And so to kind of wrap this up, to give room for questions as well, I'm interested in reparations because I see it as a very important way of working within the intersection of social and political theory to undo what we all should recognize, I think, as the source of racial inequality, which is the racial wealth gap. Wealth begets wealth, poverty begets poverty. Of course, there are exceptions, but the pattern, the kind of path dependence that has been laid through policies that have excluded Blacks for so long, policies through the New Deal, policies of redlining, policies of racial zoning, sundown towns, and so forth, the exclusion of Blacks from Social Security. Prior to that, the exclusion of Blacks from the Homestead Acts and so forth, actually casts a long shadow, right? And so we are still dealing with those effects today. And so as an urban planner, I'm interested in reparations at the municipal scale. What I call reparative planning, actually. I think we should think about reparations as a national program, but needless to say, there have been some successful experiments with quote unquote reparations at the municipal scale. And I think I'm going to be asked about those later, so I'm going to save that bit of my presentation and I'll leave it there for now.
Thanks so much, Rashad. I just wanted to highlight a couple of things that you gave us, right? The ways that sometimes we talk about racism as an individual thing, an individual deficit, whether it's because somebody comes from a deficient culture or somebody has a deficient mindset, they have individual biases against different people, versus those structural edifices that you just named, a bunch of the policies, like the different access to home loans, for example, that make it harder for one entire group to actually make economic and social progress alongside other groups, right? That structural lack of opportunity that then has generational effects. And I love that phrase. I think you're going to trademark it, right? Reparative planning.
Yeah.
Is that your phrase?
That is, yeah. I wrote an article called From Racial to Reparative Planning.
Love it, because what I love about that is reparative planning puts repair. It acknowledges the past versus like an incidental problem solving that we just noticed right now. So wonderful thank you for bringing all those ideas to us just in your introduction, and don't worry, we are right on time. Okay. So next I am going to have Shawntera Hardy, who is the co-founder and chief culture officer of Civic Eagle, a venture-backed company building legislative intelligence tools for analyzing, tracking, and collaborating on bills in state legislatures and Congress, introduce her work. She is also an award-winning public policy professional and serial entrepreneur with over 15 years of experience leading work in the areas of government affairs, healthcare access, economic and workforce development, environmental sustainability, city planning, and international affairs. Welcome, Shawntera.
Thank you so much for having me. I am really excited for this conversation. And I too like that terminology, Rashad, as we think about public policy and the damage that many of the policies have had in communities, being able to get to the root of repair, to be able to bring forth policy that truly gets to shared prosperity and contribution in where folks work, live, and play. And so I'm excited to have this conversation. So I get to wake up every day as a co-founder of Civic Eagle, working with an amazing group of remote Eagles that are building cutting edge software to allow for public policy to be discoverable, to be collaborative, and to make sure that it is accessible to all. You know, one of the things that is very clear, a lot of the things that Rashad mentioned around all these policies that are flying around, how do you keep track of it? How do you know what is moving? How do you know what's going to impact you on the ground? And when you think about the fact that from a jurisdiction perspective, there's over 400,000 jurisdictions in the United States that is pushing policy. If you think about it from a city level, a county level, if you look at a township, if you live in a county, if you live in a state, you live in Congress, you live in a school board, all of these different jurisdictions are moving policy through the process. And so our team gets to work every day to build better tools to provide better access to the politics and policies that impact us. And so being able to do that in a way that at the very fundamental essence of our platform in view allows you to track policy from introduction at this point at the state level and the state legislature, all the way to the signing at the either governor's desk or in Congress, going into the president's desk. And so we have created this platform really focused on providing you as an organization, we are a B2B product, to be able to track the bill, but also to be able to collaborate on the bill. You know, one of the things that we believe is that policy is done best not in a vacuum. And being able to collaborate with different partners, to be able to talk through bills, to be able to challenge bills, to be able to kill bills, being able to collaborate on those policies is critical to the work that we get to do every day. And so our customers are in the academic space, in the nonprofit space, in the government space, in the business association space, in the think tank space, a number of different organizations looking to be able to access our tools. And so they're able to collaborate through InView. And then we also have our tool that's accessible to all, because we subscribe to open data through our Open States platform that a number of organizations use at the organization level or at the individual level. So I'm really excited to just continue this conversation and stress upon everyone that we all have a role to play in understanding and to following public policy, because we've seen, especially during this time, during the pandemic, the seesaw of policies, mask on, mask off, money here, money there, all of those policies that are moving through our government that impact us on the ground, that impact our businesses, that really drive how we are able to show up in our communities. And so it is our mission at Civic Eagle to make sure that access is there for organizations so that everyone can be heard as a part of the public policy ecosystem. So I look forward to continuing the conversation.
Thank you so much, Shawntera. And I love how you brought forward and acknowledged it's very hard sometimes for people even to know that something is about to be proposed. We know with the decrease in local news outlets, for example. We don't have as many reporters necessarily on the beat at the State House or at the city council meeting, or their reports get pushed to the back page or below the scroll or whatever we call it now with the internet age. And so, local media used to be one of the places where people might get a heads up from those sorts of things. And so the speed at which policy can be made because of electronic media, a tool like this seems like completely necessary for anyone who wants to be able to have a chance at tracking what's going on. So thanks for bringing that forward, because I know sometimes people feel very intimidated about even getting into the space. So to think about ways you could actually get a handle on it is really empowering. And so now I'll turn to our third panelist, who is an alum of the Humphrey School, Denetrick Powers, who has a master's in urban and regional planning with a concentration in social entrepreneurship. Denetrick is the co-founder and director of planning and engagement at Neo Partners Incorporated. This is a creative urban planning, placemaking, and real estate consulting firm for small to medium-sized businesses, nonprofit organizations, and local units of government. Welcome, Denetrick.
Thank you, Catherine. Happy to be here with everybody this afternoon. What am I working on? A little bit of everything. But before I get there, I just want to preface that, I'm a planner, and often I hear planners, say that planning and being a planner is being a steward of the built environment. But I'm very much so a planner of the social environment, which is why I chose to focus on, social entrepreneurship while my time at the Humphrey. And then also, NAO, I just want to let everybody know, because everybody always asks, what does NAO mean? Where did that come from? NAO is it's a short form of a Greek biblical word, ananeo, which means to, in short, be remade in the image of God, and be remade in the image of whatever higher power that you believe in. And, for us, what that means is, coming to work and showing up to work, our full selves, our whole selves, not just, our mental selves, which oftentimes we get pitted into when we, go into work, is that we only use our brains and not our hearts, or, not our spirits, not our emotions, so we really encourage, folks that, come and join our team to really show up, as their full selves, and really just that's what we want. We find that people are able to be their best, and show up if they have space to show up, fully who they are. And I say that because, our team is growing. We started NAO 3 years ago, with just me and my business partner, D'Angelo Sfingerson. And over the last, 6 months, we went from a team of 2 to a team of 8. And we really encourage, all of our staff to, show up fully who they are. These are people that, come from the communities that we grew up in, here in the Twin Cities. And folks that don't come from traditional economic development policy or planning backgrounds. And that's how we approach our work. So, as you mentioned, I lead our planning and engagement work, prior to launching NAO, and being a student at the Humphrey, I did community organizing in North Minneapolis, around TOD and, development of light rails. But at the time I was also doing curating as well. So I also have a background in arts and cultural programming. And a lot of that is embedded in our work as well, into our engagement work. My work doing community engagement across a bunch of different types of projects, projects that are economic development focused. So we led the engagement for Ramsey County's economic competitiveness and inclusion strategy. We do, engagement for a plethora of transportation projects, because transportation projects never end here in Minnesota. But also, small area planning, master planning. And then more recently, over the last year, I had the opportunity to do some strategy development around small business incubators, accelerators, whatever buzzword that you want to use, but really the idea is to help BIPOC small businesses, get connected to the resources, but also help these businesses find space that really serves their business. Often we see a lot of small businesses that are in spaces that aren't ideal for, that business's operations. Either they're in a business, they're in a space that's way too large for them, but that's what they could find. And oftentimes that space that is way too large is not in the best quality. It's usually an older space, so you have a lot of small BIPOC businesses that are in spaces that don't give them the visibility that they need to really grow, and build a, reputation, apart from just word of mouth, within their own inner circles. And then we've also, on the development side of things, our biggest focus is working with, nonprofits, entrepreneurs, and local government, specific around projects that focus on BIPOC communities, like Rondo, like East Side of St. Paul, North Minneapolis, the Central neighborhood, multiple South Minneapolis neighborhoods, helping to, do some development triage for a lot of the small businesses along Lake Street. They either lost their spaces or new businesses that are trying to find new space. So I would say, our biggest focus is on implementation, which is why, we have, married planning with real estate. Too often, we've seen, plans, small area plans or plans prepared by local government and consultants that don't have the same type of market context in the commercial real estate industry, to really put plans together that are implementable. Too often, these plans are made and they sit in an archive online, or, they're sitting in a file cabinet somewhere. So, for us, it's really making sure that, whatever it is that we create, whatever strategies, that we're helping folks create, are actually implementable.
I'm just sitting here scribbling things down that I want to ask you about. I think we're getting a new vocabulary here with all of our participants. I love what you said there, planner of the social environment, not just the built environment, acknowledging that cities don't just have buildings and then we plop people in them, that there's a history, there's a culture, there's a context. And so those moves, if you're not thinking about both, could go horribly wrong. So my first question is going to be for you, Denetrick. So thinking about yourself as a planner of the social environment, as well as the built environment, especially in a socially fraught time like we have right now, where there are lots and lots of controversial issues, lots of disparities, inequalities that have deepened, especially across the years of the pandemic. So as you're looking around, especially seeing lots of folks put up resistance to policies that manifest social injustice or extend social injustices or don't do enough to remedy past injustices. As citizens are taking up space to participate in demonstrations against social injustice and putting forth their own ideas, what can we learn from this atmosphere, this social atmosphere, that could inform urban planning and community development?
Yeah. So I say that the first thing that we can learn is just understanding that learning happens best in an environment where dialogue is shared, power is shared, and space is shared. I'm passionate about education. One of my hopes is to teach one of these days in the future. So that was, another thing that I focused on while spending my time at the Humphrey. But it's understanding that, as planners and leaders of, local governments, is that, we have to listen. I think one of the things that people are saying exactly what they want to see, the exact changes. Like, people aren't waiting for the government to make decisions. Communities are, meeting themselves, having dozens of meetings, probably double, triple that over the last couple of years, trying to really plan and figure out what it is that they want. And they've come up with some very tangible asks. And we just have to listen to them. And then, continue to learn, to understand that, power is shared, so that we can, keep approaching planning or approaching any project, with this idea that, city council or the mayor, has more power than the community, that they're supposed to be planning or leading for. We should learn that, the communities that have been impacted the most, over the last couple of years, from social unrest, but as well as from, the COVID pandemic, is that people are, resilient. These communities are resilient and they have a lot of self-determination. And the first thing that comes to mind is how quickly communities got, gathered to put together kind of mutual aid. Like there's mutual aid all across the cities, and how a lot of these mutual aid, a lot of the mutual aid that was, brought together, was led by people who aren't traditionally looked at as leaders. These are people who they care about the community, they care about the neighbors, their families, and they did whatever it took, to make sure that people had the resources that they need. So just learning that, leadership comes in many forms, and we shouldn't pass judgments, just because somebody doesn't have a degree, or because somebody, isn't, an organizer, in the traditional kind of formal sense. We should learn that, folks are, creating space. These people aren't, folks aren't taking up space when they're protesting. They're creating space for new dialogue to happen, for new ideas to happen. I love the idea behind George Floyd Square and how, that community has, like that's now called, it's a free Black state to them. Like that's what they've changed that square to, is this is a free Black state. So just learning that people are, are challenging the old ideas and old narratives around, their communities. I think we should learn that, activating how important small business, arts, and culture is, to our cities and communities, and finding out more ways to incorporate that as we move forward. I hope that, all the efforts that have been done over the last year, focused on helping small businesses, and kind of arts and cultural organizations and arts entrepreneurs, get into vacant, commercial spaces. I hope that doesn't just go away. I hope, that we start believing that the pandemic is over, and now all of a sudden, we want to start raising the rent, on those spaces, which, many owners are going to do. Many owners aren't going to keep those spaces, art galleries or, small business, kind of community-based or organization oriented. So just understanding and learning, how do we, change our, how do our current, zoning policies, and I speak to zoning because I think that there's a lot of issues around zoning right now that prevent small businesses and creative ideas from actually, creating space, in our commercial corridors.
Thank you for that. You've given us a lot to chew on there just in one answer, and I can see that the Q&A is getting started. So folks, we will have time for your questions, so please put them into the Q&A feature. So Shawntera, let me turn to you, because when Denetrick was talking about that idea that protests open up space, right? That's something that we usually don't hear in sort of a mainstream narrative, is that the protesters blocked a street and that made it hard for regular business to get done. But clearly regular business getting done by the institutions that have had more resources to get things done wasn't doing enough for those communities, obviously. And so opening up that space of protest as one response is of course really important. But on the other hand, what kinds of support systems should we be building? Should these institutions, governmental institutions, business institutions, nonprofits, be putting in place to cooperate with communities so that they do have increased access to things like business capital, equitable pay, quality healthcare, and other things that make it easier for people to pursue things like opening up an arts organization, et cetera?
That's a really great question. I'll tell you that I'm a planner by trade on the sidelines. And one of the mantras that guided my work when I was the city planner for the city of St. Paul was this this quote that has either indigenous origin or from a country in Africa, that if you listen to the whispers, you won't have to hear the screams. And over these last 2 years in particular, we've heard the hollering of our systems. And what's fascinating is that they've been very loud for a very long time, especially for communities of color. And to the point around listening to folks tell you about what they need, that's the power in actually creating a system that's going to actually help people to get what they need and what they want. And so when we think about that from a public policy perspective, over the last 2 years, policy has gone from never to now. You think about systems in healthcare. We are so comfortable like getting virtual care, telemedicine, and shifting policy to meet folks where they are to ensure that they're actually getting access to the healthcare that they need. That's something from an institution and a systematic perspective, is that we have to ensure that we are not baking the same biases and policies into our healthcare system in this new virtual space that we have done in the office setting. When you think about what is happening around, the paper is calling it the Great Resignation. I call it the Great Reveal, because we are seeing what boardrooms are looking like. And folks are deciding and walking to say, this is not where I want to work. And so those systems that have been put in place are working how they were intended to work, which has not been to support communities of color. And they're at a tipping point, because now the inefficiencies are tipping out into the mainstream. And we're seeing that they're not working anymore. And so making sure that we are shifting policies to meet people where they are, that we are listening to ensure that we're building actual infrastructure that's going to make sense, that we are building education systems that is going to take into account the over 70 languages that are spoken in the St. Paul school systems, that we are being honest about the undercapitalizations of small businesses in our community, which are the backbone of our economic system, in particular, Black women who have just been brutally just taken back by this pandemic because they are the head of household, and access to childcare has totally dismantled. And so ensuring that we have policies in place that are actually real, that are actually meeting the moment that we're in. Those are the type of support systems that we need to make sure that we're putting in place to ensure that we are not trying to just play a different playlist so that we can drown out the screams, that we're actually inspecting the systems to ensure that where we need to dismantle, we dismantle, where we need to repair, we repair, and we're doing it in a way that is consistent with the needs of the people that are actually on the ground. And so those are the things that I think from a policymaker perspective is getting real, because in listening to folks that are actually being impacted by the policies.
So there's your new quotation of the month, right? If you listen to the whispers, you won't have to hear the screams. I think that's one that we could all meditate on in all of our systems, least of which education, right? Not least of which the education system. And Rashad, thinking about whispers and screams, I mean, one of my first and most beloved places of work, and then became an ethnographic site for me, was WVON Radio in Chicago. It was the last Black-owned radio station in Chicago. And one of the guests that I helped bring onto the show and monitored the Q&A for over the regular telephones back in the day was the author of a book about reparations. This was back in 1995, right? So when we think about like who's been talking about reparations, who's been listening, we've had this groundswell. And so, you know, give us a little bit of a sense of what you think, given your work on reparations, you know, what are the biggest policy barriers, not necessarily the opinion barriers, but the policy barriers that need to be addressed before more can happen in the reparations space, whether it's at the municipal level or even the national level?
Yeah. So one of the things is an issue of scale. obviously, right, should we think about reparations at the municipal level? Should we think about reparations at the state level? And we have seen some success with states putting forward reparations for specific moments or incidents of harm. So the Rosewood legislature in, I think, 95 or so, for example, gave reparations to the surviving victims of the race riot of 1923, I think the year was. And this is in the, again, late 90s. And so there was an apology. Each surviving member got $150,000. But thinking back to that moment in our history, the entire Black town of Rosewood was burnt to the ground, right? Several folks were murdered. And you think about the kind of harm that that does, not just at the moment, but also intergenerationally, right? The wealth that they did have, right, is completely erased, right? And so, so we have seen some success at the state level. But I think another policy issue, though, is problem definition. What exactly are we trying to resolve here? How do we understand the nature of the harm? And I guess this does get to the ideas again, but if the harm is just a free-floating kind of cultural harm, then the policy solution is just an apology and, you know, in addition to the textbooks. But if it is a material harm, such as what I just described, this intergenerational loss of any kind of wealth building potential, right? Or a major setback that has implications for generations to come, then the solution is to do something about the material disadvantage, right, that this group is encumbered by. So I'd say that's one, the question of scale. And then another policy sort of issue. I mean, really, it's just intransigence at the federal level, in Congress in particular, to do anything on HR 40. And so there are now cities.
Before you move on, could you tell people about HR 40? Because not everyone will know what that is.
Yeah, so HR 40 is a bill that actually was proposed by John Conyers in the late 80s to just study reparations, right? And we can't even get this through. But the reason this was prompted was because also in the 80s, the victims of Japanese or incarceration during World War II, Japanese Americans who were incarcerated were finally given reparations by President Reagan, of all people. And this reignited the reparations conversation within the Black community. It had always been there, but it had kind of seen a natural ebb and flow. And it was kind of at a moment where it had died down because of the collapse of the Black Power movement. But again, this reignited the reparations movement, the model that was seen with Japanese Americans getting reparations for their illegal incarceration. And so John Conyers proposes this bill, HR 40, to just study reparations. And every year since then, he had proposed this bill to study reparations. And every year, nothing had happened. And so it became a major topic of discussion in 2020 with before 2020, obviously, leading up to the presidential election among presidential hopefuls, because there was a successful reparations social movement, which existed online, which existed in cities, which existed at multiple scales, that really forced presidential candidates to state their position on HR 40. And so we've still not seen movement with that, and that's another barrier to reparations. But we are speaking about reparations more than ever. So I think what's interesting right now and what's hopeful is the conversation that we're having.
Excellent. Thanks so much for that and for giving folks a little primer on HR 40 as well. So I'm going to move to our audience questions. We've got time for at least one or two. And I think this one I'm going to direct to you first, Denetrick, but other folks can chime in. Someone asked, I heard that part of the disaster for small businesses on University Avenue in St. Paul and Lake Street in Minneapolis was that they were underinsured and many of them rented rather than owned their own buildings. Can you comment on that? And what could we learn from that lesson if those were the conditions?
Yeah, that was the case for a lot of the small businesses that were displaced along University and Lake Street. I think Minneapolis and St. Paul are learning from that. I think the counties are learning from that. I think that we're learning from it because there are efforts right now to help small businesses, the efforts around helping small businesses own their real estate, specifically BIPOC businesses, who are the most at risk, just because they're the demographic group that has the least amount of ownership when it comes to their commercial space. So I know that Minneapolis, St. Paul, Ramsey County, all doing things to help small businesses, acquire their commercial space, as well as a lot of the funding that the Lake Street Council had, is to help, those small businesses, with technical assistance, but also, grants for, purchasing another space in the future.
Thanks for that. And I think, Rashad, this also goes to the question of the kinds of reparations policies, at least that I've heard about, that are usually incident specific, or they are tied to residential segregation and the ways that redlining kept property values low. So in my hometown of Evanston, they passed a reparations bill that provides assistance for people who were in Black families who owned houses in places where the property values stayed low. They can get a compensation that they can use, but they have to use it to buy a house. And so I'm wondering what you think about these sort of very tailored policies that then circumscribe not only who gets the reparations, but also what they can use the money for.
I didn't know you were from Evanston. That's so exciting. So we should definitely have a conversation about that. So the Evanston reparations program, and I should quote reparations program, is criticized for that, what you just described. The money has to be used for purchasing a home, but also for the idea or framing of it as reparations. And so there are many folks who would prefer, and I think I'm one of them, who would prefer to call efforts like this reparative planning, which is why I use that term specifically, because the bill for reparations far exceeds what any city or even all cities in the aggregate are able to do, right? They can't meet that. If you add up all of the budgets of cities across the country, you get something like around $2 trillion. The bill for reparations far exceeds that. Even if we use the estimate of the promised 40 acres and a mule, we're above that. Or if we think about what would be required to close the racial wealth gap, we'd be, above that. So estimates for reparations actually extend from 2 trillion to $16 trillion. It depends on how you're actually measuring it. And so that's all to say that should we really be calling these local efforts reparations? I'm not sure. Then there's the question of agency and respect for those whom you are trying to make amends with. As the person who has been implicated, or as a structure, let's say, if we're speaking about government, who is implicated in actually producing and perpetuating the harm for all of these generations, you really shouldn't be in a position to stipulate how that money could be used, right? Or if you are going to say it has to be used towards, this particular end, you have to have a very compelling reason to do that. And so I'm not sure the Evanston program really meets that. I think it's a great program. I think we can call it something else, and I think, we could actually do that in many other cities. But yes, there's this conversation, around how we should think about what they're doing.
Thanks for that. And then Shawntera, I'm going to come around to you. In this sort of same vein of what we call things and what people recognize as a resource that might be available to them or not available to them, or they might be qualified for or not qualified for. I know that when people negotiate the policy space or even announcements about new programs, sometimes they might not even realize that they qualify or they would be the kind of person who should apply for whatever that is. Can you tell us a little bit about, again, if we're thinking about systems to support Black and other people of color communities to come out of this dual pandemic with a more reparative or active and inclusive way of thinking, what are some of the maybe even terminology barriers or ways to enter the system that haven't been made clear for people that we might need to clean up?
It's a very good question related to how do you bridge boots on the ground with the policy that's happening in the different chambers. And, you know, one of the things I'll tell you that is fascinating, you know, Minnesota, we often say we're the land of 10,000 lakes, but we are the land of 10,000 nonprofits. And nonprofits are doing the work on the ground to be able to get folks access to the resources that they need. Well, those 10,000 nonprofits very seldom get resources for their leaders to be a part of the public policy ecosystem. So that is where a place where in Minnesota in particular, we need to bridge, because you have nonprofits that are on the ground, that are providing direct service and butting their heads up against really bad policy or policy that doesn't exist to be able to allow them to accelerate the work that they're doing. There's that. There's this other place with respect to who is in the seat of representation and making sure that we are providing access for folks to see themselves leading in a way that, you know, when we talk about, you know, folks that are community organizers that have been in the fire, that get the opportunity to be able to take that experience into Congress, experience into the House, into the Senate, into the City Council chambers, that's important. And it's fascinating because that is what we have been seeing, where folks are not comfortable with that type of representation when they have individuals that have been on the ground actually pushing policy. So there's this place of representation. There's this place of ensuring that folks that have the direct connections to community actually have direct connection and investment in them to be able to access, you know, the halls of public policy. You know, there's one of the pieces of feedback. I was a former healthcare and environmental lobbyist, that legislators would say, we want to talk to real people. Like, we want to talk to you lobbyists. Like, we want to talk to real people. But when real people come and provide real problems or real needs, it's overwhelming. And so there's this need for, you know, unpacking what does true representation look like, feel like, and should be like in these different places. That's something that's very important. And so I think there's this need for making sure we shift not only the language, but the representation and the access to the public policy ecosystem.
Thank you for that. So we are starting to get closer to our end time, and I have one more question that I'd like each of the panelists to address. And, you know, we talk about the dual pandemics. I know some people don't like that framing, because when you compare things like structural racism to a viral pandemic, structural racism obviously longer term, but it's convenient framing. But as we see some signs of sunlight on the viral pandemic, what are some things that you're seeing either in the state of Minnesota or somewhere else in the nation that is making you feel more encouraged about potential for more involvement, more equity, more justice, more entrepreneurship, any topic, more stabs at making reparation policy that you think other folks should know about, so that they can also feel encouraged and maybe learn more? And I will let Denetrick go first.
I gotta go first. Sorry, can we come back to me? Because I was just in the middle of thinking about.
Yes, we can. See, we should always take our time, right? So something that's, and actually, if folks out there who are still with us, if you have something that's making you feel encouraged, please share it with folks in the chat as our panelists are thinking about their answers. I'll just invite the panelists to unmute when they have their answer as it comes comes to fruition for you. And as I give you a little bit more time, I want to just preview for you all that we are going to have lots of events at Humphrey, particularly around International Women's History Month. So please do check out our website. The Center for Women, Gender, and Public Policy is going to be co-hosting and hosting lots of events, and we're going to continue these kinds of conversations throughout the year. So now I'll turn back to our panel and see if someone has something to say.
Sure, I guess I'll start. So I'm really excited about what I'm studying for my dissertation. Partly, as a response to the mass protest movement following the murder of George Floyd, the cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul have implemented some reparative planning initiatives. And so in Minneapolis, they are in the process of working through the creation of a citywide Truth and Reconciliation Commission. So again, that's underway. We don't know what will ultimately come of that or what it will look like, but that's a very promising step, I think, in the right direction. We're seeing more and more cities do things within the orbit of reparations. In the city of St. Paul, there's right now the planning stages of what they call the Community Reparations Recovery Act. And so both of these programs have come from the city councils. But the mayors of each city have also signaled their support for these programs. And also in St. Paul, Mayor Carter has signed on to this kind of consortium with 11 other mayors to explore and support reparations at the municipal level, and also to support and encourage it at the federal level. And so maybe we will eventually or finally see some movement on HR 40 and also something much more tangible.
Thanks for that. So everyone look up those initiatives in St. Paul and Minneapolis. All right. Who would like to go?
I'll jump in. I'm really encouraged by the increased investment in businesses owned by people of color. As we think about ways to dismantle the deep disparities in our community, wealth creation is number 1, 2, and number 3. And so I'm really encouraged by that. I hope that the statements don't fade, which means the dollars will fade. I hope that that is sustained investment. I'm also encouraged by the normalization of talking about mental health. It's slow, it's there, but it's happening. And unfortunately, it's happening on a stage where such devastation, and folks is talking about it and not shying away from the well-being of our neighbors and our communities. Lastly, and this is just from a Civic Eagle perspective, just folks being present with policy and seeing how policy is moving or not moving. I know politics is dirty and all the other things that folks, have this feeling about it, but it is driving how we live, work, and play, and making sure that folks get access to that. And so there are just a number of tools. So for mental health, a number of great resources, a lot of work happening at NPR related to mental health. There's an amazing app, especially for folks in the Black community. Founder is actually from Chicago. It's called Alchemy Health, that provides meditation and mental health connections. Great work. Work is happening with respect to increased investment in business at the Center for Economic Inclusion, and my other organization working, Fearless Commerce, to support Black women-owned businesses. So a lot of promise, and I think 3 core areas that get us back to our commitment and accountability to the commons, because we've lost our way related to that investment in the commons.
So Denetrick, you have the last word.
I'll echo what Shawntera said about small businesses and the amount of investments that's happening in small business, specifically BIPOC small businesses. I think that's very encouraging. Again, I think that it's encouraging to see the amount of effort that cities like Brooklyn Center and Brooklyn Park are putting into, trying to support their BIPOC small businesses. I mean, those are two cities that are majority BIPOC population, which is, it's kind of unheard of. I think that they both have a higher population of BIPOC residents than I think any other city. Well, no, in Minnesota for sure. In Minnesota for sure. I don't want to mess myself up with that fact, but for sure in Minnesota. So just seeing that and just seeing how much effort that their leadership at the city council level, but also in their kind of community economic development staff level, that they're very passionate about that. That's encouraging. I will say that there's two examples, local examples, leaders. One being Kenya McKnight in North Minneapolis. That's a leader in North Minneapolis, who I've been watching, over the last decade, and have always admired, her work, and finally seeing, her work transform, into the built environment. I mean, she's already been, had such an impact, amongst, BIPOC small businesses, specifically women of color, just influence in planning, and just her commitment to, North Minneapolis, and now seeing, her kind of stepping into this next level, and just I'm encouraged to see where that goes, and the continued impact that she has on women of color businesses, as well as Mass Jeddah in North Minneapolis, led by the Elamine family. Again, another family that that I grew up with, went to high school, with their kids, and I, as a kid, not really understanding what it was that they were doing, and then being able to work with them, as a client, and now putting it all together and really seeing that the impact, understanding the impact that they've had, but being able to see them benefit, from, all the extra investment that has gone into organizations, that are, supported by BIPOC small businesses and BIPOC communities. Seeing to be able to take advantage of that. I'm encouraged by the leadership that's present, in our city. I'm excited to see where that goes.
Thank you for that. And I am encouraged by the amazing work that the three of you are doing, and the fact that we had so many people with us today on this webinar. Thank you all for being part of this event. And again, please take a look at the Humphrey website, hhh.umn.edu, for future events. And we will have more conversations like these, and we will follow on some of these very issues that we're talking about. I always say Black History Month is too short, but there's a Black History Year, and we should be doing more to make sure that we follow these threads, and you can be sure that at Humphrey, we will continue these conversations. So thanks everyone. Thanks to our panelists. Thanks to Gail Fridland, who is the mastermind behind our Zoom today, and to our communications staff. We'll see you all in the near future, I hope.